Next in the trait approach, we have Raymond Cattell. And this is where we start to see an answer to this big question, how do we find the main traits? Okay. And the answer really came through a statistical process analysis that is called factor analysis. Okay. And it's not like Raymond Cattell was the first person to use factor analysis, but he was the first person to use it for this purpose. And it ended up being an excellent way to look for kind of the major clusters of something. If you think about it, if you think about all 4,000 of those traits and out in space somewhere, and then you put them in a two-dimensional space, so that you can see where they are relative to each other. Hey, and then look for different clusters in there. Doesn't that make sense in how you would find it? And that's what factor analysis basically does. It's a way of taking those 4,000 traits, actually studying their effect within a certain purpose, so for a certain reason. And Raymond Cattell looked within the business environment, okay? And then putting them in putting these results by trait, so each trait, within a two-dimensional context so that you can see how far away they are from each other and in fact step back and identify clusters, okay? And understand that if you do this for different reasons, for different purposes, like business, he did it for business, you're going to find different clusters. And so he was the first person to do it, and he did it for business, and he found 16 clusters. And as you know, that actually ended up being the 16 personality factor inventory. So very impressive, most valid and reliable inventory right now to assist in making those personnel decisions. And remember that this was an example of the profile, the 16PF questionnaire profile for the most successful airline pilot. Okay. Now, the big five, okay, so this leads us to the big five. And this was simply the product of a factor analysis that did not look within a business environment. So that's why this is looking at simply individual differences between normal people, okay, and again, how they started out when doing factor analysis. Factor analysis is a way of taking all 4,000 traits with this purpose in mind, okay, putting them in a two-dimensional space, identifying the main clusters. And as you can imagine, 4,000 traits, they're going to be all over the place, right? And the main clusters are not going to capture all the traits by far, but they should capture they were found to capture the most individual differences between people and predict differences in behavior the best. In other words, distinguish people the best. And we ran over each of these traits before the big five, but now we're going to go a little bit further into those clusters. So let's develop that a little bit further. If somebody is highly neurotic, okay, that means that they are worried. I think that's a term that you learned before. Now you can add some to that, okay? Worried, insecure, self-pitying, and really important in this cluster, the idea of emotionally unstable. Now, if somebody is really low in neuroticism, you can think of kind of the opposites, right? So this would describe somebody was really low in neuroticism. They'd likely be calm, secure, self-satisfied, emotionally stable, right? Extroversion. I think you thought of this as outgoing before. Now we can add to that. So outgoing, someone who's high in extroversion, okay, is likely to be outgoing, sociable, fun-loving, lively, and energetic. Once again, outgoing, sociable, fun-loving, lively, and energetic. And then you could probably pause this and figure this out on your own, but let's see how close you came if so. If you're low on extroversion, you are more retiring, sober, reserved, and even-paced. Retiring, sober, reserved, and even-paced. Okay. And the idea of this is not to memorize every single one. It's to get the picture of what more is involved in each of these clusters. The low and the upper end help to define that in your mind. Remember that our tests are simply recognition, right? You don't produce it, but you need to recognize these. Now, open-mindedness, this is a really interesting one. I told you to think of it as open-mindedness, even though the technical term here is openness, okay? And, you know, we thought of it as being open. Someone who would be high on open-mindedness would likely be very open to new ideas of others, new different ideas, and that's really important, right? Because some people are pretty closed to hearing ideas that differ from their own, or hearing about values that differ from their own, or political ideas or religious ideas that differ from theirs. Okay? But we can add to that also openness to new experiences, a preference for variety, being very imaginative. That's also part of this cluster. And an independent thinker. Now, someone who's low on open-mindedness is likely to prefer routine instead of variety. Prefer routine, be more comfortable with routine, okay? Be more conforming. It's kind of the opposite of independent thinker, right? More down-to-earth as opposed to imaginative. And somebody who's really going to prefer familiarity. Agreeableness. Somebody who's high on agreeable is nice, right? Let's add to that friendly, soft-hearted, compassionate, in other words, trusting. Trusting is important here, and cooperative, okay? So they tend to be friendly, soft-hearted, trusting, cooperative, nice, okay? And of course, you can think about the opposite of that, right? Somebody's low on agreeableness. They're going to be more antagonistic, ruthless, skeptical instead of trusting, skeptical, and uncooperative. And then conscientiousness, and you were thinking of this as attention to detail. Let's add very careful and dependable and reliable. You can see employers would really be drawn to this, right, for most jobs. And disciplined. So if somebody is high on conscientiousness, they are likely very careful, very detail-oriented, very dependable. Let's add organized, very disciplined, very reliable. Okay? If they're low on this, they tend to be more careless, more weak-willed as opposed to disciplined, more disorganized, right? And more undependable. So thinking in antonyms there. Okay, I want you to try something fun. I'm going to give you an example first. But, we mentioned early on in this class that the big five are used in marketing. So many different professions, people know and hear in the process of their education, they learn about the big five. One of where the big five is used the most outside of psychology is in marketing, actually. And let me give you an example. When working, what you're going to be doing here is I'm going to give you a product that is not invented yet. Okay, but hopefully one that'll be fun to think about. And I just want you to see if you can try this. So I encourage you to actually pause the video after we talk about this and try it. But try to write a slogan, a different slogan for your product, 5 different slogans, but one for targeting people that are high in each of the big 5. Okay, so first, before I give you your very unique product, okay, here's an example that students did with another unique product, a party app. So an app for your phone that will clue you in on all the parties that are going on in your metropolitan area, your large area. Okay? And this is what students came up with to target extroverts. It's probably the easiest one, right, for this app. They came up with the slogan, you'll be the life of the party, for targeting people that are high in agreeableness. They came up with this, help your friends stay in the loop. Okay. For conscientiousness, they came up with very good job. They came up with never miss an important party commitment. Okay. You might not think that parties would be high on the list of priorities for someone who is conscientious, but if it is a party that they committed to, hey, themselves to, then it likely would be. Or at least making that commitment would be high priority for them. Then, high in openness, they came up with experience new adventures. Okay. And this is my favorite, for those high in neuroticism. Okay, they came up with this, know what roads to stay clear of on weekend nights. Okay, so they did a really good job of this. And this is what I want you to try to do with your product. Okay, so the product I'm going to give you, we all wish, especially as students, I'm sure you wish, was invented and really worked, is a memory bar. So like energy bars, but, to increase your memory. So try it.